All right, good morning, fabulous fourth graders. So, today we're going to read about the settlement of the Piedmont from 1730 to 1775. Let's begin. North Carolina settlers from Europe and or of European descent remained mostly in the coastal plain region until about 40 years before the American Revolution. Remember that was 1775 to 1783. The fall line, with its waterfalls and rapids, made traveling on rivers difficult and discouraged migration into the Piedmont from the coastal plain. But once settlers began arriving in the Piedmont, they came in great numbers and helped make North Carolina's populations grow rapidly. The colony's population more than doubled in the decade from 1765 to 1775. The Piedmont stretches from the fall line westward to the edge of the Appalachian Mountains. This colonial backcountry differed from the low-lying coastal plain. Its limestone and clay soils supported forest and grasslands. Its swift-flowing, shallow streams and narrow rivers were not good for boat traffic, but they offered excellent sites for mills and farms. Though few roads ventured into the backcountry, two were vital to the settlement of the region. The Great Indian Trading Path began in Petersburg, Virginia, and traveled southwest through the Piedmont to present-day Mecklenburg County. It had been used for centuries by Native Americans, and in the mid-1700s, settlers began using it to travel into North Carolina. The second major road used by settlers was the Great Wagon Road, which stretched from Pennsylvania through Virginia's Shenandoah Valley into North Carolina. Initially, the push for European settlement of the Piedmont came from English colonists living in the east, but Piedmont rivers, such as the Broad, Catawba, and the Yadkin/Pedee, flowed south into South Carolina. That made communication and trade with the eastern part of the colony difficult and discouraged settlers from the coastal plain. For this reason, only a few came inland from coastal towns, and by the 1730s, Piedmont, North Carolina was just starting to grow. Early Piedmont settlers were primarily Irish, and German people who were descendants of Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia settlers. These settlers came down the Great Wagon Road. Many left their home colonies because suitable land in those colonies had become scarce and expensive. Pause here and think of these three questions. Where did most of the Piedmont settlers come from? How did they get there? Why was it difficult to travel to the Piedmont from the coastal plain? Continue. The Scotch-Irish, or the Ulster Scots, were descendants of the Scots who had moved from Northern Ireland. They had prospered in Ireland until changes in English policies led many to migrate to America, where most settled in Pennsylvania. They began to arrive in North Carolina in the 1730s, leaving Pennsylvania after crops were harvested in the fall and arriving in the Piedmont in time to plant winter crops and seedlings that they brought with them. On small farms, these Scotch-Irish settlers grew corn for home use and wheat and tobacco for use and for export. They raised livestock and drove them in large numbers to northern markets. Settlers built stores, gristmills, sawmills, and tanneries. Blacksmiths, carpenters, coppers, potters, rope makers, wagon makers, and wheelwrights established many local industries. Brewers, distillers, weavers, hatters, tailors, and others practiced their trades either in isolated homes, or in shops in town. Germans of the Lutheran faith came to Pennsylvania and then to the Piedmont for many of the same reasons as the Scotch-Irish. Most of the Lutherans settled in the area drained by the Catawba and Yadkin rivers. Some joined members of German Reformed congregations and settling all across the backcountry. And third, we have the Moravians, also from Germany and then Pennsylvania, arrived in present-day Forsyth County in 1753. They began building a well-planned, tightly controlled congregational community. Land was held in common, and crafts, occupations, and even marriages required approval from community boards. Salem and its outlying settlements prospered and provided neighbors with mills, tanyards, shops, crafts, medical care, fine music, and other economic and cultural amenities. Pause and think of these two questions. Why did the Scotch-Irish, German Lutherans, and Moravians move to the Piedmont? What did they do when they got there? Continue. Many of the German settlers clustered together and preserved their native language in homes, churches, and schools. German publishers prospered in Salisbury and in Salem. Gradually, many of the settlers adopted English-sounding names and switched to speaking the English language. With very different cultures and religious beliefs, the Scotch-Irish and the German groups established neighboring settlements and towns, but had little contact with each other. They came in such numbers that 6 new counties were created in the Piedmont between 1746 and 1763. As the population of Piedmont grew, so did its towns. While the majority of backcountry immigrants settled on farms, others settled in and established towns. Many towns were established along the 2 main roads in the region. The Moravian village of Bethabara, 1753, Bethania, 1756, and Salem, 1766, were not far from the Great Wagon Road. Hillsborough, 1754, and Charlotte, 1766, were established on the Great Indian Trading Path. Salisbury was established in 1753, where the 2 roads crossed. Pause and think of this question. Why were towns established close to the main roads? Continue. Most of these towns had stores, taverns, craft shops, churches, and schools. Salisbury, Hillsborough, and Charlotte were places for county courts to meet. On court days, people came into town to trade, buy supplies, and socialize with friends. Also in towns, as well as large farms, crossroads stores, farm and craft products were gathered together for shipping to the coast. Once there, they were traded for goods and supplies that back settlers needed. Back settlers could not produce for themselves. In a similar manner, flocks or herds of livestock were gathered to be driven to distant markets. Pause and consider this question. How are the historic towns of the Piedmont similar to the towns we live in today? How are they different? Continue. Because of the geography of the Piedmont, much of this trade flowed outside the colony. Few roads connected the Piedmont with the coastal plain. Around Hillsborough, for example, many settlers sent goods up the Great Indian Trading Path into Virginia instead of to North Carolina ports such as Edson. People living in the northwest Piedmont still found it easier to send goods north along the Great Wagon Road. Other goods from the Piedmont traveled on rivers that flowed into South Carolina. Colonial and county officials were concerned about the destinations of goods from the Piedmont. They built or improved roads to courthouse towns, mills, and stores to make trade with the East easier. Their efforts proved successful, and by 1760, Piedmont settlers were sending goods over land toward the coast. A 1773 pamphlet reported that 40 or 50 wagons filled with beef, pork, and flour in barrels, also their livestock, Indian corn, raw hides, butter, tallow, and whatever they have for the market, were arriving daily in the small town of Cross Creek, which is present-day Fayetteville. These and other products, including wheat, deerskin, tobacco, naval stores, and flaxseed, were then loaded onto rafts and floated down the Cape Fear River to Wilmington, North Carolina. Pause and consider the question. Why do you think officials were concerned about where the goods from the Piedmont were going? What did they do about it? Continue. All right, so that's the end of the article. So now what you're going to do is you're going to fill out this graphic organizer. All right, you're going to tell me what brought them to the Piedmont, them referring to the Scotch-Irish, German Lutherans, and the German Moravians. So 1, what brought them to the Piedmont? What was their farming like? For example, they grew wheat from home. For home. All right. 3, what were their contributions to the Piedmont? And then the last one, what are their trades? All right, these are just some examples, blacksmith, carpenters. All right, so that's just some examples. All right, good luck with your work, guys. Bye.